Next topic is config map. Okay, so we learned in the previous exercise how to create a volume, okay, and attach it to a pod. Okay, that was for storing the last data. Okay, so volumes are used for storing the last data. Okay, but suppose if you want to store some configuration related stuff, okay, configuration data, okay, and for that you don't need to use that volumes. For that we can use something called as config map. Okay, so in config map also we'll be creating a config volume, but it is not the same as the persistent volume claim. Okay, the name is volume, okay, but it's for mounting the configuration data. Okay, why there is a need for mounting the config data as well? Because again the pod is ephemeral. Whatever the configuration we store in it will be lost. Okay, that's why it is necessary to store non-sensitive data as a key value pair. Okay, mostly used for a key value pair, but in this example we do not have an application which has some key value pairs like database host or MongoDB URI or something like that. So we'll be using some different one, but generally it is used for storing non-sensitive data as a key value pair. The name non-sensitive is important because for sensitive data we have something called secret. Okay, so when to use secret? When it is a sensitive. When to use config map? When it is a non-sensitive data and mostly in the form of key value pairs. And when to use persistent volume claim? When we have need the storage, okay, for last data. So in config map also we'll be creating an object like this config map. We'll create a config map. In this example we are using index.html itself as a config map. Generally it can be something else as well, but this is also a valid one. We are just saying that whatever data in index.html, it should always be persistent. Okay, even and where does it store? In the PVC stores it in EBS volume or some other volumes, but config map data will be stored in a HCD, the Kubernetes component, the master node architecture we have seen. In that there is an HCD, etcd. There it will be storing this config map in key value pairs. So let's see an exercise on config map. So we'll create an Nginx config map. Okay, so I'll show you the difference. So I have deleted everything. kubectl get all. We do not have anything here. And let's check if there is already a config map available. kubectl get config map. Okay, there is one, but that is used by the Kubernetes itself. So we'll create one config map. In this config map, we have index.html and two files are there. One is index.html and second one is nginx.conf. Okay, one is for the data and other is for some configuration. Okay, so what is the default one and what are the changes we are doing, that I'll explain. Okay, so in this we are just adding one more file. We want this file to be persistent. Okay, which data? Index.html. These are the contents of index.html. Okay, it starts with the pipe. Okay, as there are multiple lines. Then we are adding one more data, that is as an nginx.conf file. Okay, here we are modified it a bit. Okay, the default nginx file is having something else. We have just added something nginx.conf. Okay, so generally we want, if you want some custom nginx configuration, by default nginx pod will have some configuration which is same always. Okay, but if you want some customized one, okay, and if you want it to be persistent, we'll have to use config map. Okay, now just apply it, kubectl apply -f. nginx config.yml, and if you now see kubectl get config map, there is nginx config. Just describe it. Okay, describe and check for details of config map. So we have two data. One is index.html and other one is nginx.conf. Now we have to use it in the pod. Okay, so we'll create an nginx deployment which will create the pods. We're creating a deployment and a service. kubectl apply -f nginx deploy. So let's check the file as well. So here we created for this nginx config, nginx config map. Okay, here also we'll using it as a volume, but remember it is not the physical volume. Nginx itself means config map also we use as a volume. So here we are defining HTML volume and nginx config. Okay, so here we say that the nginx config which we created, okay, which has the file index.html, that we should use as a config. Then the nginx.conf config which we create, that will be named here. So we are defining here. Okay, and here it is mounted, here it is used. Okay, so instead of a default index.html file, it will have our custom one. Even for the config map, the default nginx will replace it with the default config will replace with the nginx.conf. Let's apply and test. We have already applied. Just kubectl get all. Okay. Now we'll have to go inside the container and test it. kubectl exec -it. Go inside the pod --bin bash. Okay, curl localhost. So if you see, it is giving us our custom HTML page, not the default one. Okay, and let's also check that other file, that is, let's see if we have this. This is the default.conf. Okay, so it won't have the nginx. We created as an nginx name, but we have replaced it with the default one. So this is the default one, but we don't remember what is the exact configuration data. So for that, I'll just create a default test pod and we'll test it there to compare. So this is the one, cat. What is there? Okay, this is the file. Okay, this is our custom HTML page, and this is custom nginx configuration. Now I'll go out of the container, kubectl get all. So we have only one pod as of now. Okay, the one which we deployed with the config map. Now let's, for comparison, create one more pod. So I'm creating a deployment name nginx test. Okay, using an imperative command. Just to kubectl get all. Kubectl exec. Let's go inside the pod -it. Go inside the test pod --bin bash. What we need to test? We need to test, yeah, curl localhost. Okay, so the default page is this one, but we have something else now. Okay, in that different nginx config pod. So this is not created with the nginx configuration. Okay, the default config map which we used in this one. Okay, so the files are different. Similarly, let's check the other file, the default config file. It has some different structure. It is not the same one. Okay, so if you see, there are some commented lines and all, but in the config map pod which we used, the contents are different. They will always remain persistent even after the reboot. Okay, so that was all about the config map.